right, so welcome everyone to the author talk with Malcolm Nance, and there will also be a book signing. Spotty Dog Books and Ale is outside selling both of his, the book that's released as of November 12th and the book that he wrote last year. So you are welcome to purchase that after the program, and Malcolm will sign the book for you. My name is Brenda Schufelt. I'm the program director at the Hudson Area Library, and I welcome you to this event. We're very excited, and there was a lot of excitement because a lot of people wanted to get in this room, so you guys are very rarefied. Please do check out our upcoming events. We have dances, we have all kinds of classes here. We have many different events, including local history events. And you can see those events at our website, HudsonAreaLibrary.org. All of our programs are free, so if you feel the call, please do donate in our donation box outside as well. And now I'll introduce Malcolm Nance, who's busy catching up with a friend outside. He is in the building. He's a New York Times best-selling author and media commentator on terrorism, intelligence, and cyber attacks. And he'll be discussing his book, which is The Plot to Destroy Democracy: How Putin and His Spies Are Undermining America and Dismantling the West. And he will also be discussing, I'm sure, his latest book, The Plot to Betray America. So he is a local resident, and he has established the Warriors Haven Veterans Farm in Stockport. Many of you know these things, I know, but it's nice to also hear the local connection. He's been in the United States intelligence for over 36 years, and he served in the United States Navy, specializing in naval cryptology. He currently works as a counterterrorism and intelligence consultant for the U.S. government's special operations, homeland security, and intelligence agencies. And he's also a counterterrorism analyst for NBC News, MSNBC, and a commentator on WAMC. So, Malcolm Nance.
Because the last time I was in this building, the room faced that way. And so I was waiting to go through that door. But like everybody who lives around here, first off, I'm glad to be here. I'm so sorry that the last time this was scheduled, I had a tragedy in my family. I lost my wife 2 days before. And you know, Maurice, she would have really appreciated me coming and doing it like right after, but it was just one of those things where we had to immediately reschedule, and you know, I hope you all understand and appreciate that. And you know, my wife is watching now, so I've got to do a better job than I would have done then. But I was just sitting outside with Kelly from the Spotty Dog, and like all people who live in Columbia County, and I've owned a house here for 11 years. This is my retirement home. It's actually out in Stockport, and like all homeowners, I bought a ruin. So all you people who live here in Hudson know what I'm going through. So I bought this ruin, and it was a ginormous ruin. And my wife was the one who actually found it, because we were living in Abu Dhabi at the time, and she said, "Look, we're eventually going to have to find a house back in the States." And we had sold our house in Washington, D.C. because we were never moving back to that. Well, the moral of this story is, okay, oh, I'm your neighbor. There is never going to be any moving from this. Which is funny because it's taken me, what year is this? 2019? Let me see, 2007 we bought that place, so it's taken me 12 years to come speak here in Hudson. What the hell, people? I've got 3 New York Times before I get into the one that is currently a bestseller, I have another funny story. So one of my books was called Defeating ISIS. And in August of 2016, I got a phone call from Time Magazine. And I was like, wow, Time Magazine, you know, amazing. Why are they calling me, right? Is this about the announcement that I made on MSNBC saying the United States was under attack by Russia in a wide-ranging information warfare operation designed to make Donald Trump president and to destroy democracy? Nope. They call me and they go, hey, you're the author of Defeating ISIS. And I go, oh yeah, I'm feeling proud, like, hey, they're going to do a book review. And I go, yeah, that's great. They go, what do you think about what Trump said? What did Trump say? Right? Did he diss my book? Did he do, Defeating ISIS is a pretty big book. It's literally an encyclopedia of everything awful, right? Of everything about ISIS. And he goes, no. He goes, he gave one of our reporters a quote. And I said, well, what did he quote? He said the last book that he read, the last two books that he read was Jerome Corsi's book on Hillary Clinton, and the last book he read was Defeating ISIS by Malcolm Nance. And I literally am like looking at the phone. And I go, it's 548. And then it popped into my head. He goes, well, that's what he said. What do you think about that? And I'm like, yay, great. I hope he likes all the pictures. Lots of pictures, people being beheaded and assassinated, lots of maps, Clearly, he did not read the last chapter that didn't say that, because it didn't say screw over your allies. So I thought, man, that is really weird. Why would he say that? And then this scenario popped into my head. Has anybody been through an airport recently? I got bookstores called Hudson Books, right? And I said, I know what was going on. He was going to Teterboro, and there's a Hudson Books, and he walks by, and face out is Defeating ISIS. And he goes, read it, loved it, and then walked onto the airplane, right? And when caught, they go, what's the last book you read, Mr. Trump? And he goes, Defeating ISIS. Yeah, it looks smart. But if that guy had said, it's 548 pages, right? I had the unfortunate pleasure of running into Kellyanne Conway in a studio. And, I'm going to tell you all the good stories today. At some point we're going to talk about this book, but this is all tied together. Well, this one's a funny story, so I just like telling it. So I'm in Philadelphia, and I run into Kellyanne Conway, and it turns out my manager was the head of talent for CNN. And she was very close friends for a long while with Kellyanne Conway until she joined the Trump campaign. Actually, she was with the Ted Cruz campaign at first, and then moved over to the Trump campaign. And so I go to Kellyanne, I go, hey, Kellyanne, my manager, blah, blah, blah. And she says, oh, yeah. And I said, hey, listen, so your boss said he read my book. She goes, what book is that? I said, Defeating ISIS. She goes, oh, yeah. She goes, oh, well, Donald, he never sleeps. And all he does is read. I thought, yeah, sure he does. All night long. Donald Trump reading away. I didn't have the nerve to tell her that Tim O'Brien, who's the editor at Bloomberg, who wrote the book Trump Nation, also knows something about Donald Trump reading. He's a friend of mine. And he is the only person to ever get Donald Trump deposed on video and have it released to the public. And there's a famous scene where a lawyer says, you can YouTube this, right? Just Donald Trump deposition. Where a lawyer says, Mr. Trump, I'd like you to read paragraph 3 of this document. And you know how they need you to read it out loud so that they can show that you understand the questions that you have, right? So he starts to read, and he's just like, well, it says here, the words on this page are blah, blah, blah. something about the lawsuit. And she goes, no, Mr. Trump, you must read every word of that paragraph. It's fascinating. He refuses to read. Either because, and Tim O'Brien says, either because his father taught him never read anything out loud that can be shown back to you, but more than likely, he is a functional illiterate. He really doesn't know how to read. He knows phrases, he knows certain words, but deep concepts that are beyond the basics on like a teleprompter, which he has a very difficult time reading, are very hard for him. And so I didn't want to say this to Kellyanne Conway. So I said, listen, Kellyanne, there's something else I need to talk to you about, right? Because I didn't want to embarrass her while she was literally laying flat, getting makeup troweled on. And I'm not joking. Her makeup artist has a palette. I mean, this is how it's done, you know. The good makeup artists don't, right? They just go right for the thing. She had a full palette going on there. And so I said, listen, I need to talk to you about something your boss said yesterday. She said, what's that? And I said, well, you know, I'm a career intelligence officer. And Donald's been making these noises about, you know, people at the intelligence community and the CIA being Nazis, worse than the Nazis, were unreliable, untrustworthy. And I said, that really upset a lot of us. And I said, I've been doing this for like 30 years, and that's really upsetting. And she goes, oh, Malcolm, I assure you, she's actually getting up at this point in her pseudo. She goes, I assure you, Donald will never do that again. We don't believe that. We love the CIA. We love the intelligence. Right? I don't even have to finish this story. You all know what's going to happen, right? 3, 2, 1. She walks out of their screen room and onto the television camera. I'm in my car going back, right? And a friend of mine, Naveed Jamali, if you know him from MSNBC, he goes, hey, did you hear what Kellyanne Conway just said? And I go, what? And he goes, she just did it again. And he sends me the clip, right? Not 10 minutes I'm out of that room. She goes, they are acting like Nazis, and Donald Trump, blah, 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 and the intelligence community is unfaithful. And I'm like, you just literally lied to my face. We weren't on camera, right? I'm not your children. Why are you lying to me? So I said, payback's a mother, right? I'm on Brian Williams that night. And Brian Williams asked me an innocuous question about, I don't even remember. But I answered it, and then I said, you know, Brian, I saw Kellyanne Conway today. And I said, do you know what she did? She lied to my face about saying the intelligence community was, Donald will never do that. And he was like floored. Brian, I love Brian. He's one of my best friends. And he's just like, he goes, politicians are known to do that, Malcolm. It's utterly amazing. The reason that I've prefaced all of this story, one, where I live, and that we are all neighbors, and that I get to talk to lying politicians, okay, is because all of this is part and parcel to the book we're going to talk about today, which is The Plot to Destroy Democracy. It was written here. I got major portions of it done at Rev. I got finishing portions of it done at Cafe Moto. I got, let me see, where else did I write that book? Well, quite a bit of it done in my basement. So, you know, I've written 8 books now. That book, I can say, was written in Hudson. It was written in this area, and my wife was the last person to read it. She edited it, and it is a really interesting body of work. Now, some of you know there's a new book that comes out next week, The Plot to Betray America. Don't even think of reading that book until you've read Plot to Destroy Democracy. You guys know I have 3 books. The first book I wrote related to Trump and Russia came out 6 weeks before the election. It was called The Plot to Hack America. That book was a very quick study, intelligence analysis of what the Russians would have to have in place, what strategy they would be executing, how WikiLeaks would be their laundromat, and how they would have to launch this information warfare operation. And the only result that I came up with was it would only be done to elect Donald Trump president. Now, I started that book on July 25th, 2 days before Donald Trump said, "Russia, if you're listening," right? I made my public statement about the United States under attack from Philadelphia on the 26th. And believe me, MSNBC had no idea what I was going to say when I came on air. And I'm an intelligence professional. The country, in my eyes, was under attack, not with cruise missiles, but with information. And so I wrote that book. I got it out on September 23rd. It went on to Kindle. The same day, the CIA put a nearly identical report out and had delivered it to the White House, which, if you have a second edition of that book, it has the Joint Intelligence Community Analysis on the back. And, yeah, there you go. And they're almost identical. Why? Because one, this is how I preface all my statements, I am not a journalist, in case you wonder. I'm now a writer, but I'm not a journalist. So I don't have the same standards that they have to meet. I can look at something and do what I did in the intelligence community, which is a very flash review of data. It forms in my head. I cross-reference it against the references that I have, the open source information that I have. But the one thing that I do that journalists cannot do is I can now cross-reference my beliefs, my theories, against all of my experience and intelligence experience that is not known to the public, right? So when I write these books, it is an intelligence analysis. They are not, you will not read my books and come up with the same thing David Corn does, right? Who's a friend of mine. David Corn and David Ignatius, they wrote their book, Russian Roulette, which was a very good book. That book came out 23 months after Plot to Hack America. And here's what somebody wrote on Amazon, a long, slow version of Plot to Hack America. Because they're journalists, and they have to interview people, and they just can't say, I remember this Russian operation that was being carried out in Syria in 1972, right? And it's very similar to that. Therefore, there must be these positions in the analysis. They don't do that. They're not even allowed to scrub it against their own personal experiences unless they're writing about their own personal experiences, right? They have to stick to fact-based journalism. And intelligence analysis is a very educated guess, but on the basis and strength of the information that we have in front of us. So when that book popped into my head, it literally popped into my head, but it was because I had written another book before that called Hacking ISIS, where we had two examples of a false flag intelligence operation. That's an operation where one country pretends to be another country. And we had a hacking of a French television channel and the Polish stock exchange. And they had left graffiti all around the website like they were ISIS. And it turns out that the entities that were tracked down, that was in 2014, the entities that had done that were identified by cybersecurity experts as this malware suite called Fancy Bear, which is Russian military intelligence. And so in 2016, when I heard CrowdStrike announce, we believe ATP-28, Advanced Persistent Threat 28, nicknamed Fancy Bear, had hacked the DNC, I already knew. Like all other cybersecurity experts, we knew who that was. I was like, whoa, that's Russian military intelligence. Why would Russian military intelligence hack the Democratic National Committee? Well, I lived in Washington, D.C., right? I would go running past the Watergate all the time, right? When I would go run down the Potomac. There's only one reason you would do that. You were doing an electronic version of Watergate. And that's what the first chapter of my book is called, right? Watergate 2.0. Stole that information, and you were going to use it as a weapon to damage Hillary Clinton, because she was the nominee, right? And the nominee at that point, when they released that information for the Republicans, was Donald Trump. Ergo, they're not doing it to damage Hillary Clinton. I mean, to damage Donald Trump. The first information that was released by the Russians was actually stolen from the DNC from a woman named Alexandria Chalupa, who was the opposition researcher. And all she was doing was looking for very generic, open source online stuff that you could get from the National Enquirer, right? But she had created this package. And if you're a spy agency and you're working in political warfare, you don't want your fingerprints on anything, right? So what you do is you release it, you do what we call, what Karl Rove called the Karl Rove method, which is get the worst thing out first. And then let everybody debate it, and then 3 months later the news media won't even remember it. So the whole opposition research package was released to a journalist at a website called Gawker. And Gawker was sort of this tongue-in-cheek website. You know, they did good journalism, but you know, they did it in a funny way. I liked Gawker. And when I saw that Gawker had the opposition research folder on Donald Trump from the Democratic National Committee, that's when I knew this was an intelligence job. Because I said, it's almost Karl Rove's playbook. And then a few weeks later, a fake entity would come out calling himself Guccifer 2.0 and would say, I have all of the information from the DNC, I'm a Romanian hacker. Well, the real Guccifer was a Romanian hacker who was in FBI custody. And this guy was calling himself Guccifer 2.0. And one thing about the cybersecurity community is they're not stupid, you know? The first thing that they did was, there is a way that we can look at your keyboard. We can literally recreate which kind of keyboard you are on by the way that your keys stroke. And a cybersecurity expert had determined that this guy was using a keyboard that was Russian Cyrillic, which had an English language key set on it. Not a Romanian keyboard, right? And there were no accent errors that you would see on a Romanian keyboard, right? Because they use like European symbols, right? Because it's based on Italian, Romanish, right? But he had made a mistake and he had used a Russian symbol. And so they were like, someone is trying very hard to look Romanian and ain't doing such a good job of it. So to me, I was like, already in the middle of a Russian military intelligence operation. That was in June, I was convinced of that. And then by July, the goods were starting to show up, you know? But the news media wasn't interested in that Russia was carrying this operation out. They were interested in what's in the emails, right? The whole Bud Her email school of media coverage. And now Donald Trump's president. So, Plot to Hack America really went through all of that. The next book I wrote, I immediately saw that what I needed to expand on was not just that strategy, just the hacking. The more important thing in my world, and I write an entire section in the book about it, where I say, we have this thing called Whiskey 5 Hotel. That's WWWH. Who, what, when, where, why, how, right? And we are not so interested in who, what, when, where, or how. Those things we can determine just by dint of things must follow the laws of physics. For example, if an airplane takes off out of Poughkeepsie, right? And it's a military aircraft. And the next time we see it on satellite, it's in San Diego. I can answer who, what, when, and how. Because it took off, it flew, and then it landed at another airport, right? Who? Airplane. What? Flew, right? When? Between time A and time B. How? Like all aircraft do. And I can tell you every procedure that must occur from beginning to end must occur because it's just the nature of what they're doing. But what I cannot tell you, unless I have more information, is why. Why did you fly from Newburgh to San Diego? Now I've got to watch you more closely. The intelligence community is always way more interested in why, because why tells us your intentions, okay? So when I finished Plot to Hack America, I did a very quick why. They wanted Donald Trump president. But I didn't do a deep dive of why. And I thought, as soon as I wrote Plot to Hack America, I went right into writing Plot to Destroy Democracy. And all of the signs were flashing. Red lights were going off everywhere. Everyone was saying why out loud. And I went back and I scrubbed Vladimir Putin's history, scrubbed the history of him in the Communist Party, and I saw all of these KGB designed operations that were going into effect, that were being used on the United States. And he kept coming back to why? Why are they doing this? Well, they told us why, but you have to go back and read their writing. Vladimir Putin was a lifelong communist, let's start there. When he was 13 years old, he went to a KGB open house. And he told them, they have these things. And he said, I want to join the KGB. He loves telling this story about it. And they said, oh, that is very good. Here's what you do. Go to university, finish that, go to law school, finish that, then come apply to the KGB and we'll talk to you, right? He did that very thing. He went to university, he didn't have to go to law school, but he went to law school and then he joined the KGB and he became a baby spy in the KGB. I have been to Vladimir Putin's house. In the next book, Plot to Betray America, I talk about what it was like, Vladimir Putin baby spy, right? Sitting in his desk, sitting in this place in East Germany, what's now East Germany, but what was East Germany. And what he did, his job was to manipulate people. That was his job. Because the guys he worked with were fat and lazy and sat around and drank beer and vodka all day. They didn't want to go out, meet people who were coming off the train from West Germany and try to flip them into being spies. So they do what everybody does. They sent the intern. Right? They sent the baby spy. Right? They were like, Vladimir, go over to Stasi headquarters. Right? There is a new West German there who's got an East German girlfriend. You must make him a spy. And he is just like, oh, okay, I'll go. I'm the new guy. So this is what Putin did. Okay, if any of you remember when you were really young and you were on your first job, you were paying your dues, right? But when you were paying your dues, you were really getting a good grounding in whatever it was that you were doing. Okay, I don't care if it's working at the cash register at Stewart's, you know how a cash register works and you know how a convenience store works. Okay? You can run, Dunkin' Donuts as a corporation. So that's what Putin was doing, and he liked it. He was like me. I took every mission offered to me, every mission. I wanted to be out there, I wanted to be having fun, right? Notice I didn't get married until I was 42. Because it's fun. Putin, he loved his job. He loved being a person that manipulated people to doing his will. And that is very important in this game. So in Plot to Destroy Democracy, I go over in great detail how this guy went from mid-level KGB officer to insane billionaire when the Soviet Union collapsed. But you know what? Even though the ideology collapsed, Putin's goals, which were based on Soviet communism, have never changed. That guy does not believe in democracy. He says it all the time. He says he has actually changed the motto of Russia. He adopted Tsar Nicholas I's motto of nationality, orthodoxy in the Russian Orthodox Church, and autocracy. Putin has adopted those exact same goal. That was 1815 that those things were put in and led the era of the czars being Russian Orthodox Christians, being rabid nationalists, and being autocrats. But what they're missing out of that is what he technically should have added, which was kleptocracy. Steal every damn thing you can get your hands on. Putin became a billionaire because he used the KGB and ex-KGB agents to bring the St. Petersburg mafia under control. And they just literally took all the resources of the KGB and started killing people. And the mafia in Russia is a lifelong endeavor. You're not in it for an hour. You were born into it, that's it, you're in it for the rest of your life. Okay? They are professional criminals. You know, they tattoo themselves. You know, they're really a hardcore organization. And to bring them under control, he just started mass murdering them using state resources. All of the KGB, it would be like letting loose the CIA on gangs, right? You're just never going to get away with it. You think you can't use a telephone, you can't open your window shades, they don't even come at you with the FBI, they bring Delta Force, right? That's what Putin did. And then he got in agreement with them. And he said, listen, here's what's going to happen. We're liquidating the city of St. Petersburg. That's like me saying I'm going to liquidate Chicago. When I mean liquidate, I mean sell every state government. Now, got to remember, the Soviet Union was 100% government owned. Everything was for sale. The sidewalk between 5th Street and 6th Street, pay us. Right? If you want to own that, you will pay us this amount of money. We will give you a certificate that say that you own this skyscraper. Right? Airports, military bases, every truck, mailbox, post office, everything was liquidated in the Soviet Union. That's why overnight, guys who were, you know, pushing their cars on dirty streets were billionaires within days, because they would just seize the documents related to those assets and sell them. And Vladimir Putin was a master of it. They say Putin may actually be as rich as $200 billion. Yeah, when you own everything and you just sell it. They're like the Arab oil sheikhs. Those guys are actually trillionaires. They're not billionaires. They just say that they have a little few $1 billion. They actually own every drop of oil themselves personally. Putin is sort of like that. He's a kleptocrat. He stole everything. And when you got in his way, he just killed you. Or he would shame you. And this is where we got the first use of the word compromat. Compromat is just Russian for compromising, right? A compromising piece of information, blackmail. And so Vladimir Putin used compromat in his first job when he became the KGB director, not KGB, FSB director. He became the first director of Russian intelligence in the post-Soviet era. And so, by doing that, he started using the state resources to help out the state. And the first thing was, there was an anti-corruption officer who was going after very drunk President Boris Yeltsin. And so he just turned to Putin, and the reason that he made Putin the director of the FSB, Russian intelligence, is that he was told, this guy is loyal. He doesn't care if you're dirty. He will stick by you. So Yeltsin made him the head of Russian intelligence. Almost instantaneously, a videotape of the prosecutor in bed with 2 prostitutes was shown on national TV. And the guy resigned, and he stopped his investigation of Yeltsin. But before he did, he said Yeltsin did nothing wrong. His daughter, who is suddenly a billionaire, did nothing wrong. And I absolve him of any crimes that he did. I'm not joking. That's precisely what happened. Does that sound familiar? The Attorney General just suddenly turning over and saying, you did nothing wrong? That's where the word compromat comes in. It really means blackmail. And Vladimir Putin started, and that's how he became president of Russia. He engineered all of that, and Boris Yeltsin made him the vice president, the prime minister of Russia. Then Yeltsin resigned, and Putin promised not to prosecute anyone, and he became the president of Russia. That's the way it is done over there. Nothing has changed in Russia since all of our old, we're all of a certain age. That view of the Soviet Union being poor and dirty and controlled by a central ideology, it's still there. Except the ideology now is money. And there's a middle class because people have to work for billionaires. But there's a billionaire class, and they are all run by Vladimir Putin himself, the oligarchy. And he does not allow you to have your money unless he decides you can have your money. There was a famous Russian billionaire named Viktor Khodorkovsky. He crossed Putin. His news channel insulted Putin. Putin seized all of his assets and was going to charge him with treason while he was in England. Right? He ran a very hard-hitting news organization. Putin had said it was a state asset, sold it to another friend, and they changed over to television, variety television shows overnight. News channel, then showing, dancing shows. Dancing with the Stars. That's how Putin got control of the Russian state media in 1 year. He just bought it out, gave them to people, and then kept up the trappings that, hey, we're still free people with free speech. Like Fox News, he leaves one protest organization that's an internet website to say they still have contrasting voices and believe in freedom of speech. The plot to destroy democracy is an analysis of how he used 4 chapters on Russian intelligence operations that were used against the United States. And I show you the source of how he used those operations, but they all come from the KGB. It's fascinating. In the oldie days, they would have to go to India and buy 200 printing presses and give them to people and hire journalists for like $1 a day to write up fake news stories and hope that somehow it would infiltrate its way into the Associated Press news feed. Now in the modern world of computers, one person has an equal power of the New York Times. And I show you how they transitioned and figured all this out. But more importantly, the Soviet Union used its academia to study us. Every asset of state power studied the United States. And unlike us, they kept all those records. And they know all of our fault lines. They know where our political bodies are. They really know us very well. Vladimir Putin is not so stupid as to say, hey, go back and get me that 1975 study on blacks in the United States. And and they will go back and he will bring in academics to come in and study, to discuss this, and then he will develop an intelligence operation designed to break us. Anybody ever heard the story that AIDS was a weapon designed by the CIA to kill gays and Haitians? There are still websites with that story. That story was actually created by an East German intelligence officer assigned to the KGB called Ladislav Bittman. No, she's Czech. Ladislav Bittman. I have met Ladislav Bittman. He tells us, he bragged about the planning meeting that they had. And they go, this will make blacks angry. This will make gays angry. Americans are so stupid, they'll believe it. It took them 3 years to get that story into the news media. 3 years! And that story's in the book. You gotta read that stuff. Does anybody have a copy of the book? Yeah. Betraying America, you got one, right? Remember that? Plot to Destroy Democracy. That's the one I need. Alright, before I end and start taking questions, because I know we're going a little over, I'd like to read you something. Who likes them? Anybody seen the movie Captain America? Come on. Captain America, first one. Any of them. Everybody loves Captain America, right? Come on. Kelly, you need to go buy a bunch of books. There's a book I want everybody to have called The Virtues of Captain America. I always give it out as a reading assignment. It's a brilliant book. You will feel good about yourself. Captain America is actually, I think he's like 107 years old in the movies, or 90-some years old. But he was frozen in ice, so he's a super soldier, so he looks like he's 25. And Captain America's foe were the Nazis in World War II. But the Nazis created a scientific organization that went out of control and became a political organization that was designed to overcome and bring Nazism to the world through an army of super soldiers who all thought ideologically alike. Does anybody remember that from the movies? Right? What's the name of the group? Hydra. Right? If you want to know about Hydra, here's another assignment. There's a TV show called The Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Yes. And it's an extension of the Captain America movies. And they fight Hydra all the time. All right? Chapter 9 of my book is the motto that they said. They stopped saying Heil Hitler because Hitler thought too small. Right? Hitler did not believe in taking over the world by infiltrating governments secretly and then popping up and taking over everything. That was Hydra's philosophy to spread Nazism, right? And the use of science and technology. So when I was writing this chapter about an international European cabal of states, the first thing that popped in my head was, holy cow, this is Hydra. Most European right-wing political groups today are funded by United Russia Party, Vladimir Putin's political party. Brexit, funded by United Russia. The government of Austria that won power in 2016, that party, Alternative for Austria, it was started in 1952 by 2 Nazi officers. And they took power 2 years ago in Austria. Their first act was to send a thank you delegation to Moscow to meet Vladimir Putin. The government of Hungary, run by a pro-Moscow government. AfD in Germany, the new German right-wing alt-right party that now has 30% of the popular vote, right? Run by United Russia, funded by the United Russia. Marine Le Pen, the fascist, openly fascist candidate for president in France, took a $50 million loan from Vladimir Putin. When she lost her election, there was a picture that somebody put on Twitter of Vladimir Putin looking sternly down on her, and they had captioned it, "Bitch, where's my money?" Her promise, I'm not joking, her first promise, she said, on day 1, I will remove France from NATO. On day 2, I will remove France from the European Union. And on day 3, we will sign an alliance with United Russia. What's the universal theme here? The Russians are everywhere. This book is more about Russia than it is about the United States. The third book, Plot to Betray America, is about the United States. But the last chapter is about, why does Trump love Russia so much? Because they have created a narrative frame around his world. They have so enamored him with money and women that he only thinks through the Russian lens. If he's wearing rose-colored glasses, they designed, crafted, and put them on his face. So he only thinks through what he was said by the Russians. So, I'm going to do a quick reading, and then I'm going to take a few questions I know we're going to go over. Did they kick us out at 4:30? No. Okay. You're going to want to hear this. So, I went to Norway a couple of years ago, and I don't think I had it in here. No, I don't. But a friend of mine, you guys might have heard about the massacre at Utoya Island in Norway. Guy goes through, massacres 69 children. I know it's in the book. I'm about to read it. Not only did I know it's in the book, I might have written it. Because I went to Oslo, and when that massacre occurred, I was counterterrorism. I taught at Macquarie University in Sydney, and I got a call from one of my former students who was a Norwegian intelligence officer, a young woman. And I go, she calls me and I go, whoa, Narvik, Norway? That's in the Arctic Circle. Who the hell's calling me from Norway? And I mean, I just wasn't putting one and 1, 2 together because I'm watching the downtown burn because he blew up a car bomb, and we're hearing they mass murdered 69 children. I answer the phone, it's this person, and I go, hey, what's going on? She goes, shut up. I'm not joking, this is how she said. She goes, shut up. Malcolm, I need you to listen. I was like, I haven't talked to you in 5 years. And I thought, this is serious. This is related to what's going on. She goes, I am looking at a translated document that we've just taken out of the house of the shooter. She goes, we have 69, and this wasn't even out at that time. We have 78 dead people here, 69 of them are children. She goes, I'm reading this guy's manifesto. It is rife and full of American citizens as his inspiration. I am going to officially ask you, I'm going to send it to you. I want you to read it to me. I want you to call me. Don't email, just call me back, because I want to know, do we have an international conspiracy which is centered in the United States? I was like, God damn, I've done some spooky things in my life, right? That's what we call spy stuff. I was like, this might be one of the most important things I've ever done. So I read it, and I realized, I was like, this is dangerous. But it wasn't just centered in the United States. When I did this book, I realized this is worldwide. This is European-wide. And these guys have been infiltrating our societies and meeting American citizens and talking to each other. Anders Behring Breivik, the mass murderer of Norway, is constantly quoted by right-wing mass murderers in the United States. Those manifestos, that live stream video, putting writings on your gun like the guy in New Zealand when he mass murdered 50 Muslims, the manifesto format is exactly Anders Behring Breivik's format. Exactly, only he did like 300 pages. Most guys do about 10, 15 pages. And it's like, why am I doing this? Because I am a soldier of the white race. Why did I choose this gun? They brag about their guns, right? This was the most, affordable gun that I had. And I realized, I was like, holy shit. You know what popped into my head after I did all this analysis? Hail Hydra. I said, oh my God, Hydra is real. It is a white supremacist underground that is infiltrating our countries, our governments, and our children. Many of them are really benign guys who just do this alt-right talk that's really acceptable, like Charlie Kirk and all these other, seemingly, polo-wearing guys. So I'm going to do you a quick reading about that. So chapter 9, Hail Hydra. On July 22nd, 2011, 33-year-old Norwegian right-wing extremist Anders Behring Breivik set out dressed as a policeman to strike a blow against the ruling Norwegian Labour Party. Breivik had spent months building a 2,100-pound bomb that he had placed in a large panel van. His plan was to explode it in the middle of the Norwegian government district, the Breiviks. He intended to destroy the central building where the government bureaucracy is housed. If he was lucky, he would also kill the Prime Minister, and he bragged about that, by the way. He would kill the Prime Minister and everyone inside of the building. In his mind, the liberal Norwegian Labour Party had allowed Muslims into Norway, and that meant the purity of Norwegian blood would be corrupted by immigrant blood if mixed. By the way, there's a lot of footnotes in this chapter. I used his own words. He bragged about all this. And he was like, you're ruining the purity of Norwegian blood. And I'm sitting there thinking, that guy needs to be shanked. I mean, some people need to be destroyed. No, he's living in a place that's the equivalent of a halfway house with access to a lake that he can paddle on. To him, this government-sanctioned miscegenation was a crime against the white race. He blamed the Labour Party and he was going to punish them. Breivik forged a police identity card and uniform, drove the van into downtown Oslo, set off the bomb, killing 8 people. When the bomb went off, Oslo was in a panic. Terrorism had never reached the shores at this level, and the world watched, thinking Islamic suicide bombers had chosen the soft Nordic nation for punishment. That was Breivik's intent. He wanted the world watching in one direction while he went off to perform a second act of white nationalist terrorism. Breivik drove west out of the city into the wooded countryside. It is stunningly beautiful land filled with lakes, bays, and small islands. Still dressed as a policeman, he drove to Utoya Island. This was a small private island that was known for a gathering of the ruling Labour Party's Workers' Youth League camp. When he arrived there, he loaded an American-made Mini-14 semi-automatic rifle. The rifle was a cut-down version of the U.S. battle rifle from the 1950s, but its powerful 7.62 millimeter NATO bullet could knock down a moose in seconds, since it had the magazine capacity of 10 bullets. Over there, ours are 25. In preparation for his murders, he scored the tip of every bullet with a razor so they would break apart, then dipped them into nicotine tar to cause burning in the wound canal. He wanted to inflict maximum pain, but Breivik was not there to hunt big game. He was there to kill off the next generation of liberals in Norway. That is a quote from him. I am here to kill the next generation of liberal leadership, their children, right? Breivik rode to the camp in a boat designed to get the attendees over to the island. Another passenger was the senior leader of the camp, Monica Bose. Bose, known as the mother of Utoya, was a beautiful, tall, striking, brown-haired woman. She was also a brilliant scholar and the director of the Norway Maritime Museum. She volunteered to run the program for the kids on the island. Breivik told her he was going to the camp to protect the children. Remember, he's dressed as a fake cop. She noticed he was acting strangely and confronted him about what was happening in Oslo. He was evasive and did not seem to know even the basics of police procedure. As she disembarked on the island, she knew something was wrong and sprinted off the boat to warn Trond Berntsen, a city police officer assigned to protect the camp. Breivik realized he was compromised. It was at that moment he definitively decided to murder her, the policeman, and all the others. Breivik confessed to what he did with simplicity. Quote, I was holding the pistol, and there was a bullet in the chamber. And when I lifted the weapon, Monica Bose said, I should not point the gun at the man in front of me. I then pointed the pistol at his head and shot him in the back of the head. Monica started to run, and I shot her once in the head. Then I shot him twice in the head again. Then I went over to her then and shot her twice in the head. Unquote. He bragged. He bragged in court about this. I'm telling you, if there were some brothers in that prison, I would be dropping hints to some Norwegian parents that for $50 in cigarettes. They're not us. Believe me, they have very nice prisons. The island was his. No adults were left to stop him. According to his calm testimony at his murder trial, he thought to himself before beginning the massacre, I thought this was now or never. There were hundreds of voices in my head saying, don't do it, don't do it. From there, Breivik systematically started shooting every child he saw, one by one. Children and teens ran screaming and hid, though they could barely escape him. He slowly and methodically walked to each, aimed a Glock pistol at their heads, and snuffed their lives out. For those who were too far away for an effective pistol shot at their center of mass, he methodically took aim with a high-powered rifle and shot them at their center of mass. In his trial, Breivik said he spared some of the young ones, but he would tell others he was a police officer and beckon them with his finger, and when they came within range, he would shoot for their heads. He seemed to be surprised that his victims stood totally paralyzed with fear as he raised his gun and shot them. By the time Oslo SWAT teams arrived, he had shot and killed 69 teens and adults. Of course, like all cowards, he feared death and surrendered, knowing he would never pay with his life. Because he laughed to himself that Norway was too liberal for the death penalty. He said he mass murdered the victims who were between the ages of 13 and 22 years because they were the next generation of, quote, multicultural liberals, whom he labeled Marxist. During his rampage, he shouted at them, "You are going to die today, Marxist," unquote. Their parents had allowed a Muslim invasion of Norway, and in his estimation, he made them pay for their treason to the white race. So, let me just read this part too. Anders Breivik was the first of the foot soldiers of the white revolution being stoked by the neo-Nazi and fascist diaspora that was congealing in America and Europe. Surprisingly, these former Nazis and fascists were being funded and given ideological backing by Russia, a nation savaged by the Nazis in World War II. Breivik left no stone unturned. To ensure he would be remembered by his white supremacist brethren, he had written and left behind a 1,518-page manifesto in his home, and it was called his manifesto. As an international terrorism expert, a copy was sent to me on the same day it was found by a Norwegian domestic intelligence officers. They wanted to know if this was the work of a madman or part of an international right-wing terror network. My assessment was that it was both. Breivik named himself as a member of the, quote, European Patriot Resistance Movement, unquote. Does any of this sound familiar? All of these terms are now used and adopted by the alt-right, but they are also used by all right-wing parties in Europe. And I list all of those right-wing parties. Everything that I'm reading to you right now, is Hydra. Not a joke. Just we don't have Captain America. All right? We're screwed. These people are the alt-right in the United States. The mass murders at the synagogue in San Diego. The shooter used the exact same words. They used the exact same phrases. New Zealand, Germany. Excuse me, Pittsburgh. The guy who was building the bombs, the pro-Trump guy in San Diego. They all communicate with each other. And it's interesting that when I go on in that chapter and break out every one of the right-wing groups that are now resurgent in Europe, they are right now leading multiple governments over there. The government of Italy. Steve Bannon just tried to buy a monastery in Italy to create what he called a gladiator school for a school for right-wing gladiators to learn how to be political combatants, to go home to attack and destroy the liberal bases in their country. I've written the previous 5 books that I wrote about were about terrorism and Al-Qaeda and ISIS ideology. I'm not seeing much daylight between the two types. You are seeing a world where they think that they are put down upon. Another component of this is the incel movement, the involuntary celibates. That's part of the gamer movement. Do you know the gamer movement, where kids play video games and earn money and do things on the internet, was created by Steve Bannon? That's how he earned $100 million. He created the white gamer revolution and turned it into what we call today the alt-right. Oh, it gets worse. It doesn't get any better. I go over Brexit, and then I go into the American evangelical movement, and then the alt-right, and then Donald Trump. And it leads you to the 3rd book, but it gives you a lot of detail about how sewn together these movements are. And it's dangerous. Look, I'm from lovely, tiny Stockport, New York. True story, last thing I'll say. I'll take a couple of questions. So my buddies, I'm a state homeland security trainer. I'm probably going to be a state law enforcement officer here soon. And a buddy of mine at the FBI calls me, he goes, "Where do you live?" I go, "I live in Stottville, New York." He goes, "No, what's the town you live in?" I go, "Stockport." And he goes, "I don't want you to move from your house for the next 30 minutes. I go, "Why?" He goes, "We're about to execute a high-risk warrant on a terrorist living in Stockport, New York." I was like, "You are just joking."
I was
You guys
at your
don't.
house that day.
Yeah, you were. You were at my house.
And I told you about it, and you couldn't believe
Doug
it.
Fife.
You were saying,
There is a guy by the name of Douglas Fife who was being arrested, who was the guy that was going to create the radiological assassination weapon with another guy from Schenectady. He lives in my village. Not anymore. I think he lives in Dannemora. Yeah, he's on the other side of the creek, right? Terrorists can come from anywhere. I love telling that story to my FBI friends. And they were like, oh my God, you were the radiological bomber? I go, living right over the hill. Yeah. Right on the other side of the creek. Right? Was going to assassinate Muslims, and when he couldn't sell the weapon to the Jews, the Anti-Defamation League or something, he went and claimed he was part of the Ku Klux Klan in Stockport, right over there. Right now, I'm a big gun guy. I'm a big shooter. I can't up here because my weapons are like special operations weapons. But I know a lot of guys up here, and I found recently that there's a militia in Columbia County. The Clapback Militia, which hadn't been formed since 1783, I think. But these guys are going around and they think that the zombie apocalypse is coming. I have some news for you. You are the zombie apocalypse they're talking about. They're not arming because they think that, freedom of speech is coming. They think that liberals are coming for them. And if you're in this room, you're probably liberal. Because you can exercise rational thought. And that's why you're here. So, that is what the plot to destroy democracy is about. If you've got Plot to Betray America today, I'm sorry, you must go read Plot to Destroy. No, I don't want you to just to buy the book. They have, I think I gave a few copies here at the library if you want to borrow it. But you will not be missing the entire underpinnings of Russia's strategic plan to essentially do what they did, which is to create an axis of autocracies, of which the United States is one leg of that. And that's why Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump are lovebirds. Right? They are working for the same reasons. Trump is working for money. Putin is trying to make Russia great again. And the only way to do that is to destroy the United States. And he's doing an excellent job from what I see. We literally just surrendered the Middle East to him. So that's the end of my presentation. I'll take a couple of questions. You were first because you're quick off the bat.
where does the NRA and the Koch brothers fit into this?
It's chapter 13. There's the whole NRA chapter. There's an NRA chapter here about, I start with the alt-right, because, I was on to Maria Butina really early. And I was one of the first people to come out and say, this is a Russian intelligence officer or a subcontract intelligence officer. She was selling used furniture at age 21 in Siberia. And at age 24, which is 3 years of training school, she pops up as the deputy of this Russia pro-gun group and is flying to the United States, right? In skimpy clothes, holding guns. And I don't, it's not chapter 13, it's chapter 12, Russia, America's Beachhead. The evangelicals and the NRA are all in there.
And the Koch brothers, are they?
The Koch brothers, believe it or not, the Koch brothers aren't involved in that. It's the Mercers. The Mercers are big. The Kochs don't like Trump. They don't like him at all. The Kochs are just evil of their own right. Okay. Next question. Yes, ma'am.
What were the Republicans doing in Russia on the 4th of July?
Yeah, supposedly celebrating America's values. The 7 senators, I have them in here, listed out in here, and then we go over them and their trip in Plot to Betray America. Plot to Betray America, the next book, is strictly about the Americans and how they were a component of all of this. This tells you how the Russians bought those Americans and what tactics, techniques, and procedures they used to buy pretty much most of conservative Europe. They actually called this the nationalist conservative, the global nationalist conservative movement. There's a bigger elevator above here. Yes, ma'am.
How true is the title Moscow Mitch now that you just mentioned?
Pretty true. I mean, the guy is working hard. I mean, a Russian oligarch, he wants sanctions lifted against him. Then the oligarch buys a smelting plant in his district. Oh, come on. That's beyond quid pro quo. You know, that's ridiculous. Hold on, ma'am, you?
Before I go home and pull the covers over my head again, thank you for your service to our country.
Thank my wife. I do all the fun stuff. Right? My mom and my wife had to sit back and take that. All that worry.
What is the solution to save ourselves? This is
Oh,
really
yeah.
frightening stuff.
I know. Really, you know, it's as simple as you're going to have to vote. Like your life depends on it. This upcoming election is going to be the single most important election in the history of the United States. You saw the 2018 election. When we said that that was critical, it turned out to be true. All right, it turned out to be true. If we had lost the House of Representatives, things would be very bad. Now, they can be worse. They can do what is coming up now. You are going to make a decision, right, about whether American democracy exists on January 21st, 2021. I mean exists, because right now, their strategy, and they say this stuff out loud, is not a constitutional republic. Oh, this is my favorite part about Republicans. They all go, we ain't a democracy, we're a republic. Yeah. Okay, dumbass. Whoever read Plato, he defines in like the first paragraph that a republic is a democracy where the rights of the voting minority are protected. Dumbass. So, sorry about that. But it just drives me crazy. So we have got to vote like your life depends on it. And if you're up here, you send in your vote early, okay? Get 5 of your friends, have them send in their votes early, then go to another state like Ohio, okay? In Pennsylvania, and go help them get out the vote. We do not care about the 40% that voted for Trump. It's the 50% of this nation that didn't vote at all. That's it. They are going to be our salvation. High school kids, right now, get them to vote. You know, get them registered, make sure they got registration, ID card, whatever, and go vote this year. Ma'am in the far corner. You? No, stand up, you're it. No, next one in front. John, lady, great girl. There you go. Yeah.
In order to save what we call our democracy, which is almost lost at this point, you've got a lot of facts out there, and you've got a lot of people who are either uneducated, ignorant, and don't want to read and get all of that information from either Fox News or Twitter or whatever else. So the challenge that I'm asking you about is, how do you educate and get to not the 38% that are, as far as I'm concerned, completely unreachable, but how do you get to the other, I think there are 29% of this country is registered as Democrat, 27% is registered as Republican.
Right.
Okay, so, you know, in terms of registered voters, that's fine. But how do you get that middle ground to be educated when the media is clearly, even the New York Times, I write in all the time, on this Ukraine thing, okay? Nobody talks about the fact that everything that Trump did in Ukraine was for Russia.
Right.
Plain and simple. He stopped their aid so they couldn't fight back, okay?
Except
He tried to...
WAMC yesterday.
I'm sorry?
Actually, no, it was Ari Melber. I was on Ari Melber last night. I was hammering that. How do you do it? You're going to have to do it. But here's the problem. Most people have jobs, and they got to go to Walmart, and it's hard to come in there. That's why the phrase, you got to do what the Russians did for Trump. This is called meta-narrative framing, where they build an information box around the person that they're talking to, so that they're only going to see it from their perspective. And unfortunately, it's sort of cheating. Where when I have these conversations with people who are pro-Trump, I ask them a true question. why do you hate this country so much? And they go, well, I don't hate the country, I love this country. You go, no, you don't. All right? The Constitution of the United States is under attack, and you support him over the Constitution. And they'll say, yeah, well, no, we don't. And I go, do you think this impeachment is false? And they go, yes. And I go, that's the effing Constitution. All right? I mean, come on. You know, sorry if I'm using salty language, but I am a sailor. But it's the Constitution.
So how do you reach these people if the media is not saying those things?
You have to do whatever education you can wherever you find it.
How about local media?
Well, look, it's the media.
No,
Sir?
how about...
Oh, I want to just move on real quick. Yes, sir.
Yeah, a couple of things.
No, there's that guy right there. He's pointing to himself.
Trump has a really widespread practice of using assistant directors or acting directors.
Yeah.
And specifically, I'm thinking about in the DNI, when Coates was fired, I think, by tweet, and he put up this right-wing Yahoo from Texas, which was thrown away in 5 days because he was, and then Ms. Gordon was clearly, like, very, very qualified, passed over. We got McGuire, is it?
Yeah.
Who then, when the Inspector General referred the whistleblower, he ignored the black letter of the law and carried it to the actual object of the investigation.
So your question is...
How widespread, how much is it degrading our intelligence services, and how widespread is all of this? How much of an effect is
Funny
it
you should
having?
mention it. So I'm on the board of the International Spy Museum. I'm the board of advisors. And my daughter and I were just at the ball that we hold every year, just 2 days ago, where I got to meet Sue Gordon, and James Clapper, and George Tenet, and William Webster. We have 6 ex-directors of the CIA on the board. And Abigail Spanberger, who was a CIA officer who became a congresswoman, who actually wanted to meet me. It's pretty funny, you know? So I do not fear for the rank and file. We do our job. We work for the seat of the President of the United States, not the man. What's happening with these deputy directors and actors, they are gutting the executive so that he is putting in essentially political commissars who are in there to bring purity to these organizations. But let me tell you something, and I get this all the time. I get guys who are out there, the CIA are liars, and you know, you guys suck, and you're out to get Trump, but you'll believe every damn word out of my mouth if I say ISIS is coming, won't you? Right? I say that there's an ISIS plot, you're like, Muslims, where they at? Right? You cannot be schizophrenic about intelligence. If I tell you that we're under attack by country X, that's it. We don't have time to be playing games. Trump is playing games with this because, you gotta remember, he knows why he's doing what he's doing. Now to me, all the intelligence indicators in the world are there, and I wrote them in 2 separate books. In the new book, Plot to Betray America, Chapter 2 is called Supervillain with a Leash, and that's about Putin. Chapter 3 is called Trump, a dog to be walked. And he is. He is being led around by a nose ring by a man whose whole career was to manipulate people. And he's easy, because he loves money. All right, last question. Yes, sir?
Yeah, Trump is easy, but what I don't understand is the Senate.
Is who?
Is the Senate. I mean, it's a naive question, but so much is going on. What is the deal with the Senate in regards to Trump?
Do you remember the book? This is how I lead off the chapter on Republicans supporting Trump in this book. In the new book, Plot to Betray America. Does anybody remember Lil Abner? There's a cartoon character in there called the Shmoo.
Yes.
The Shmoo is this thing that looked like a bowling pin with eyes and whiskers. And if you looked at a Shmoo, it would turn into whatever food you liked. And so in Little Abner, he would like stare at a Shmoo and he'd pop into a ham steak, or he'd turn into an apple pie or something. And Shmoos desired to be eaten. They wanted to be eaten. That's all they ever wanted, was to be eaten. The Republican Party are Shmoos. And they are worried, as far as they're concerned, when they see that energy that comes from their base of hatred, they realize, hey, they're right. We can finally say and do the things we've always wanted, and I'm not going to cross those people. They'll come shoot through my window and throw bricks through my door and call me a liberal, and then I'll be out of a job. They're cowards, just plain cowards. And I think another component is, I think that they really realize that they are getting a dream fulfilled. They can be as rude and as radical as they want. Here's one last thing. You guys got to go to other states and watch cable news.
Oh, you're right.
And you will see television commercials showing what liberalism is. And they are scary. It is beyond propaganda. It's like, liberals are marauding through American cities. And they're showing people throwing trash cans and everything. He goes, they're totalitarian and they want to destroy American democracy. I was in St. Louis and I was like, what am I watching? What I'm watching is pure propaganda. And I see people on Twitter going, you totalitarian liberals. Right? I was at Politicon in Nashville. And I had this guy who's just like, you liberals are communists. And I was like, wrong. You are the people who are kissing the butt of an ex-KGB officer and a lifelong communist. Explain to me, you're the commie lover. And they go, no, I ain't no commie lover. And I go, and this one guy had a shirt, he goes, I'm anti-socialist. I go, you are you? And he goes, yeah. And I said, you know, I spent 20 years in the armed forces of the United States. We're the largest socialist organization in America. All of our health care. My wife, God bless her, who just passed, had $3 million worth of treatment. By the way, thank all of you for paying your taxes. I really appreciate it. Purebred socialism. Right? Sort of communist, actually. But the fire department, the police department, public works, that's socialism, you idiots. They don't get it because they're too stupid to look past the word. They think it's communism and they're kissing the butts of a commie. Literally a commie. All right? I've been to his office. So that's just the world we live in, but it's your job to educate and motivate and get people out there because this election, this is the defense of democracy. It is on American constitutional republicanism is on the ballot. And how you vote means that you decide between a constitutional autocracy, where there is a fig leaf of Bill of Rights for some people, and you are led by an autocrat. As the woman said on Fox News earlier this year in that famous video clip, I never thought that I'd want a dictator, but if we have to have one, it should be Donald Trump. Those are your fellow citizens. So you either go educate them or you out hustle them. Right? So thanks for coming today. And so I started looking, you know, my wife's from Montreal. And so one day we were driving back from Montreal and we drove through Vermont. And you guys know how pretty Vermont is, right? It's very pretty. I mean, it is literally postcard. You know, and there's dairy farms everywhere. And we said, we should start looking up in this area, up in the Northeast here. And she said, well, it's going to have to be halfway between Montreal and halfway between Philadelphia. And so, of course, I ignored that. And I started looking in Saranac Lake, which is the first place I looked at. I was like, oh, this is really a pretty town. Then I found that Saranac Lake, on average, is the coldest place in the United States year-round, right? And it's like Frostbite Falls, you know? It's just one of those places. And that's because everybody who came there was diseased or ill, and the cold air was designed to help them. You know, when they would come up on the train by the trainload during the day. This is what I learned, by the way, looking for houses. Every house I went to, beautiful Victorians. And we found that lots of them were sanatoriums where people would come. And the train would come up full of people by the day, and then they'd take down all the dead at night. And so I learned something about Saranac Lake, and it's very pretty, not moving there. And we looked in Lake Placid and Evansville and a whole bunch of places up there. And we actually made an offer on a house, a beautiful Victorian house that was in the town called Champlain. Does anybody know where that is? Okay, anybody been to the Canadian border customs post? All right, as you're approaching that customs post, there's a little village to the right. That's Champlain, right? And we made an offer on this house, and the family, somebody had passed away, and you know how it is when you have children who have a number in their head, and they're not taking anything but that number, so they never called us back. And we literally flew back to the Middle East with no news whether we were going to buy that house. So, the funny part was, I told my wife, I was like, where the hell am I going to get an espresso around here? And she goes, in all seriousness, she said this, Montreal, which is like 35 minutes up the road, right? And fortunately they built a Starbucks in Plattsburgh. But other than that, there was the McDonald's, the McCafe at McDonald's. So we decided not to move to Champlain. And we went back, and then some of you might know that I have a history with waterboarding. If any of you recall, in 2007, I was called to testify before Congress because I had written an article for a defense journal called Small Wars Journal called Waterboarding is Torture, Period. And this was in the middle of they were trying to appoint a new Attorney General, Judge Mukasey, as the Attorney General. And this dropped, I didn't know, because I'm living in the Middle East, right? I actually wrote that op-ed on a flight to Sri Lanka. And the reason I wrote the op-ed is because my fellow MSNBC hosts, Joe Scarborough and Willie Geist, at the time were actually sort of making fun of waterboarding. And I had run the last official U.S. Department of Defense team that was authorized to do this as a training method to show our enemies just how bad things are, or to show our service members how bad things could be if the enemy got a hold of you. And so I wrote this thing, and I was like, transmit, no one's going to read this thing, right? So I fly back from Sri Lanka 2 days later, and I'm not joking, I land in Dubai, and my telephone lights up. And I have this Washington, D.C. number, 15 calls coming from it. And I call it back, and somebody goes, this is CNN, Wolf Blitzer's office. And I go, okay, yeah, this is Malcolm Nance. Oh, Malcolm Nance, we've been trying to get a hold of you. And I'm like, what's going on back here? Turns out that article was put on the front page. The Pentagon has a newspaper they put out every day called The Early Bird. And it's a collection of news stories and articles that all the generals and admirals need to read, right? And this thing was the front story of The Early Bird, which for me, having read The Early Bird my whole career and thought, man, this is amazing, The Early Bird, this is an amazing paper. It's a conglomeration of all papers into one paper. I was on the cover of The Early Bird, and I was like, sweet! And then I didn't understand the implication of being on the front page of The Early Bird, right? So, Small Wars Journal, where they had put the article up there and it had been copied and clipped into The Early Bird, they put it onto their online thing. Thousands of comments. They were one of two types, like, hey, this is wrong, and this guy's correct. And the other one was essentially, somebody should kill this guy. Oh, it wasn't really death threats, but it was more like, this guy's an idiot, he doesn't know anything. And then somebody would respond, dude, he's the guy who did this. Yes, he knows something. And there were all sorts of debates in there. And so that's how I had to come back to the United States. But before I came back to the United States, I was called to testify before a congressional hearing on the efficacy of waterboarding. And I was, me and a guy by the name of Colonel Steve Kleineman were sort of the ringers. And of course, I had read this op-ed, and I had to make a statement before Congress. And I literally had to write my whole career down and then sort of recap the article and explain why waterboarding was bad in really elementary school terms. Because let me tell you something, if you watch a congressional hearing and they're asking a question, that's not grandstanding. They really don't know the answer to that question. and they want to know on the record, right? So I thought, all right, this will be fun. So I had to fly back to the United States. My flights back were on an airline called Etihad, which was the airline of Abu Dhabi, means United in Arabic, right? And this was a new airline, and the flights were 16 hours, nonstop, Abu Dhabi to New York City. And there are no number of movies you could possibly watch that could fill that. And so on my way back, I had to write my congressional statement. But before I left, my dear wife Maurice says, "Oh, I want you to look at a house." I'm like, what? And at this point, we were on Realtor.com all the time, right? And we were looking at, we had moved south, and we were now over at Cooperstown, which I didn't know had a lake in the middle of it. And if I had known that, I'd be living in Cooperstown. The problem is, it's impossible to get to Cooperstown, right? I mean, you got to drive for anything. I mean, to go to the big city of Albany, right? You got to drive 2 hours. That's insane. That made freaking Champaign looks, suburban. So I go, okay, I'll take a look at it on the flight, right? Because they had Wi-Fi. This was like one of the first planes with Wi-Fi. It's crazy Arab money, right? And so I'm flying back, and I look at this thing, and I go, what the? I go, the first thing I look at is the square footage of the house. And I go, oh, that's an interesting looking house. And then I go, 10,493 square feet? And I'm like, what the hell are we going to do with that? And so I was like, that's out the window. There's no way I'm going to buy that house. So I said, all right, I got to write my congressional statement. And so before I got on the flight, I was sitting in the airport. I sent the realtor. My wife said, "Hey, send the realtor a note." So I sent the realtor a note. And her name's Karen Davila. And if any of you see any of the realtor signs around here, she's a realtor here, Karen Davila. And so I said, okay, whatever. And I fly to the United States. 2 days later, I'm giving my congressional statement. I'm in Washington, D.C. And I just finish, I go back to my hotel room, and I get this call from a 518 number. And I'm thinking, I didn't even know where 518 was, right? So I go, okay, whatever. And I answer the phone, and she goes, "Hi, I'm Karen Davila, a realtor from Hudson, New York." She goes, "You sent an inquiry about a house?" And I go, I'm trying to think, right, because there was like 200 houses. We sent inquiries on, but none down here. And I go, wait, is that the really big one? She goes, yeah, that's the one. And I go, yeah, I sent that in. Because I'm thinking, there's no way I'm going to get time to go look at this house. And she goes, and I'm thinking, if we look at that house, I'm going to lowball the hell out of these people. It's a ruin. It's full of falling plaster and lathing. Tons of it. Every ceiling in that house was collapsed onto the floor. Right? Because water was coming through the roof. Right? I always start off with maintenance stories, right? Because, by the way, this is my part-time job. Right? My full-time job is going to Lowe's, and working or cleaning that house. So being a, New York Times best-selling author and TV analyst is not my job. As you all know, if you live here, your house is your job. So I go, yeah, my wife said, yeah, we sent that inquiry. She goes, are you serious about this? I go, yeah, we're seriously looking and we want to take a look at it eventually, right? I was thinking maybe my next trip to the United States in 2 or 3 months. She goes, well, I gotta give you fair warning. It's in very, very bad shape. And I said, okay. And she said, but I will also say this. The owner's wife, the guy who died, and his wife inherited the house. She lives in North Carolina. She does not want this house. She needs to pay off her taxes, and she has chosen a number. Right? I'm not going to tell you what the number is, because it's ridiculous. Oh, by the way, how do you get $1 million house? Does anybody know the answer to that question?
You pay $2.
No, you do what?
You pay $2 million.
You pay $2 million. That's one way. I'm pretty close to that. No, you buy it for a ridiculous amount of money and then you spend like 700, 800,000 putting it into the house and then you get $1 million house, right? Yeah, it's not worth $1 million. That's just what you put into it. So I'll make this actually all involves what we're going to talk about today, by the way. But there's no way I'm coming to your local and not talking about that house, right? So, that house 11 years and we have just finished phase 1 of the restoration. We did phase 0, it took about 7 years. We just painted the interior, so we're in phase 1. So I said, yeah, I'm seriously looking at the house. She said, she goes, they are looking at a number. And if you are interested in this house around that number, I would take a look at it. And I said, okay, what's the number? She told me the number. I looked at my watch and I thought, 4:30 in the afternoon. And I said, if I leave at 2 a.m., right, I can be there at 7 in the morning. And if the foundation of that house is solid, I'm buying that house. The number was ridiculous, right? And so I said, okay, right? And then I said, it's too low. There's something wrong. It's going to collapse, right? Now, I've been through a lot of bad houses, right? So I'd gone through 3 inspections, and I knew this house had to be a ruin. It really did. The number is just way too low. And so, I said, all right, but I'm going to take a chance on it. So I started at 2 in the morning from Washington, D.C. I drove nonstop. I arrived in front of the house at 7 in the morning. I waited there with a coffee, and Karen Davala comes rolling up. And this place is a disaster. If any of you seen my house in Stockport, you guys know where Stottville is? Yes. You know where the bridge going over? You seen that giant white mansion to the left? That's my house. If any of you have seen that house 5 years ago, before it got painted, you knew it was a ruin. It was a ruin. Rust off the wall. Oh, it was just terrible. The porch collapsed. We had to take down the porch. And it was just a disaster. And I walked through the basement. The basement is all brick and it's built into the hillside. And I said, if this foundation is good, we're going to buy this house. So I stomped through the house. I literally stomped through the house, trying to see if the walls would fall. And I pushed on one wall and the entire wall opened. I literally could look at grass from the second floor looking down. It was, oh my God, it was a disaster. And so then I called my wife. And first off, it's Stottville. Where the hell's Stottville, right? Okay, here's how bad my geography of this area was. When I was coming down to look at that house, I was staying at a hotel in Albany because I didn't know Hudson existed. And they had said there's a town called Hudson nearby, right? You do a search, there's no hotels in Hudson. Back then I didn't realize it was just the St. Charles, right? And I got a story about that. And the Rivertown Inn, the place that's the Rivertown Inn now, that was interesting. Back in the day when I tried to I was going to stay here after we bought the house and we had to rip off the roof. That place is where it was like a halfway house for prisons. And it was interesting. So, long story very short. The next day, after I saw the house, that very morning I called my wife. She's 7 hours ahead of me. She's at the end, it's a Friday, so it's Thursday, it's at the end of her business day. And I go, hey. She goes, what? I go, we have to buy this house. And she goes, why do we have to buy this house? I go, you sent me here to look at this house. And I'm here to tell you, the price is really good. And I didn't tell her, but you're probably going to need $1 million in renovations to have $1 million house. So, but I thought the fundamentals of this was good. We wouldn't have to take out a loan. That was a lie. We did have to take out a loan, a mortgage. And I said, yeah, but we could buy this house outright right now. And I said, I'm going to put a down payment on it. She was like, don't make any hasty plans. And I go, I have to. I got to put a down payment on it. There's a guy, I guess he's a slumlord in this county. Who am I going to ask? Who am I going to say is looking at that house? Phil Geller. Because this guy is Phil Geller. So I go, I'm going to buy the house. Let's go to your office. I'm doing the paperwork. I'm putting down the deposit. You know, I put down the deposit, and actually I had to go to a bank. I did actually drive to Poughkeepsie to use one of our banks. Came back, gave her the cash payment, put it down. Boom, that afternoon, Phil Geller calls her and says, you know, I'm willing to offer you, I'll ballpark it, 5 figures for that house. 5 figures. And not even a high 5 figures, right? Because he's a slumlord. I hope his friends are. But they wouldn't be. So she's like, nope, sorry, sold it this morning, under contract, because she's legit. She's a very, very good realtor. High ethics, right? And he's like, I will slip you some money under the table if you hand him his money back. And she goes, no, he's paying in the, in the 6 figures. You're coming in, like 50%. And so she didn't sell him the house. And then so I told him, my wife Maryse, I said, hey, I'm buying that house. And she was like, I told you not to do anything hasty. I know I had to. She goes, just wait, I will call you back in 20 minutes. Now it's like 5 in the afternoon, right? It's 1 in the morning for her, right? No, it's not 1 in the morning. It's like 10 in the evening for her. And so she calls me back and she goes, now she's in Abu Dhabi, which is in the middle of the Middle East, right? Right across from Iran, east side of Saudi Arabia. She goes, tomorrow morning at 7 a.m., you meet me at JFK. I'm like, what? She goes, I'm getting on the British Airways 1 a.m. She's already driving to the airport, right? I go, wow. 1, you either don't trust me, right? Or 2, you have some feeling about this house. So I go all the way back to Albany. And then very early in the morning, I turn around, I drive down the 87, I go to JFK, boom, she gets off the flight, lands at 7 a.m., right? It's like an 8-hour flight. And, no, it's more than that, 16 hours, but there's an 8-hour time difference. And so she lands, she goes, we better be right about this house. I go, you hounded me on this house for 2 weeks, right? So we get up there. I said, you're going to find out that the structure of this house, the fundamentals of this house are very sound. And I said, more importantly, you're going to be overwhelmed by the features that are in this house. Now, my wife's a landscape architect, right? Only she doesn't do gardens, right? She does islands, right? She built literally islands out of the ocean. She had a $4.5 billion budget in Abu Dhabi. And there's an island where the new Louvre and the new Guggenheim are, and NYU and the St. Regis Complex. She designed and built that whole island. Everything that was not a building, she put in. And she got fired because she was on budget and on time. And over there, they expect you to be over budget, which shows quality. But she was on budget and on time in time for the economic collapse, and no buildings were built for 5 years on that island. But her streets, parks, roadways, bougainvillea, 100 miles of flowers were in there for 5 years. And it took 10 years to build the Guggenheim. And so everybody would drive through and they go, oh, this island is beautiful. Look at all the lush flowers and sidewalks, and there's no buildings. They're supposed to be, that's a new city, by the way. So this is my wife and money, okay? It's like, you better be right. And I'm like, you told me to come by. So she comes up, she walks through the house. We have 4 marble fireplaces, all right? They're big. They're huge. We have 4 parlors, that's why. And she goes, okay, I guess you did the right thing. And so we had been living together, and I had left the military. I met my wife, and then I went to Iraq. And I came back and got married in Washington. And then all of my stuff got put into pods, right? For 7 years, everything I have ever owned was in storage containers, right? And in a pod. And so she had to go back to work 2 days later. So she came in, flew in, saw the house, we drove into Hudson, and we were like, wow, there's a whole city here. And it looks like, you know, there's a cafe. And back when Cafe Rev used to be called Money Cup, right? We hung out in there, and she was like, well, I guess we gotta go back to New York. I'm flying out tonight. She spent 36 hours in the air for 12 hours on the ground, just to decide if she was moving to Stottville. Okay? So,